When they made the Wonder Woman movie in 2017, I really think they missed a trick by not choosing Jax Wimble as the actress. My mom is many things. She is a strong lady who stays firm on her values with her kids and even sometimes her husband. Yet whenever I need someone gentle to talk to or I'm needing a hug after a rough day, she's the one I go to. She's loved me from day one for all my strengths and my weaknesses. I owe her so much for who I am today. It's no question that God has called her to preach and to lead. And Mom, you're going to smash Flourish 2023.
I'm so excited to spend the next almost 24 hours with you. Whenever do you get to spend 24 hours with this many women in one building? I was told, obviously I was part of the decision making and the discussions behind the scene, but I was told one of the reasons we had to close ticket sales was because we are going to run out of chairs. So I think we've just built new toilets a few years ago. Next request, could we get some more chairs so that we can have some more women? And then we've got to figure out how we park everyone and have enough space for everyone to get coffee and tea in the foyer. So if you've got any logistical ideas, please let me know, because I'm sure some of you sitting out there have got friends and family that you would have loved to join you, or after the next 24 hours, you'll think, I want to invite them next year. Let's hope and pray we can find out ways to add more women, or 2 conferences. I have been involved behind the scenes the last 2 weeks, and there is a whole bunch of volunteers and obviously also our staff team who have been involved in getting things ready, and I'm so grateful and so glad to be part of that team. And so I just want to give a big round of applause, if you'll join me, to everyone who's been involved over the last few weeks. They know who they are. We've had a few staff members off sick the last few months, and we've also had some new staff members join the team who have never done Flourish before. So if you see someone looking frantic out there, please be extra kind to them so that they'll want to stick around and be part of Flourish next year. I also saw 1 or 2 volunteers when I arrived this evening kind of not recognize me properly, and it's because I got dressed up for all of you. But the truth is, for the last week and a half, I've been here in my track pants, which is actually kind of more my natural style. I love being involved with everything, but I decided I better get a little dressed up for all of you. This is me dressed up. By 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, I'll be back in my track pants, and my hair will probably be in a bun. I've always loved being in the garden. From a little girl, I can remember, I've got fond memories of my dad mowing the grass on our lawn, and summer evenings, that smell of fresh cut grass in the garden. My mum is also a botanist, and so she did wedding flowers for many, many years, and our house very regularly had the smell of flowers in it, which is really quite incredible. I managed to find a photo of me in the garden with my mum. There I am. If you can look past the horse fringe and the skinny legs, that's my mom and I. There is a garden there. But I think gardens are probably very special to God too. Not just to me, but to God. God, I think, loves gardens, and maybe it's because He created everything in a garden, which is just an absolute wonder. The plants, the trees, how many different flowers, and all kinds of things you find in a garden. Not surprising that when He looked at what He created, He thought it was good, because a garden is just the most beautiful, peaceful place. There are also many stories that pop up in the Bible and that feature a garden. And tonight, I'd like to kick off Flourish 2023 by looking at the story of a woman who found herself in the garden with Jesus. So John chapter 20 verse 1 says, "Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance." So let's just get some context here. Jesus is dead. In fact, Jesus has just died, and Mary, early in the morning, while it's still dark, gets up and goes to the tomb to look for Jesus. Mark tells us that Mary had spices, and her plan was to anoint Jesus in his tomb. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us too much about Mary, but what it does tell us is that Mary was a devoted follower of Jesus. She traveled with him, she followed him. And when she first met Jesus, she was tortured by 7 demons, and Jesus set her free from that demonic oppression. So I imagine that Mary must have loved Jesus very much. Jesus must have been part of Mary's life changing forever, that she decided to follow him. And now we enter the story where Jesus has died. The one she's been following, the one she loves, the one who set her free is dead. And she wakes up and she goes to the tomb, and the tomb is empty. And Jesus' body is not there. She's just watched him die, a crucifixion, the most gruesome death, and now his body is not in the tomb. And in verse 2, it says, she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him. She can't find him, she can't see him, and she was hoping to anoint him with spices and oil. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying, and as she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw 2 angels in white, seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, woman, why are you crying? They've taken my Lord away, she said, and I don't know where they've put him. At this, she turned around and she saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for? Thinking he was the gardener, she said, sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him. She was determined to find Jesus. Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. She realizes as she hears him call out Mary, as she hears Jesus call her name, she realizes it's Jesus and he's in the garden. There's a whole lot about this story that challenges me, but I'd like to draw 3 things out of it as the opener for this evening. And the first one is this: Mary kept showing up. Mary kept showing up. Verse 2 tells us that while it was still dark, she got up, she went to the tomb, she took her spices. I don't know about you, but if I were Mary and I had just witnessed someone that I loved, someone who I traveled with, someone who I'd given my life to, die the way Jesus died, I would have given myself at least a few days to stay in bed, to mourn, to grieve. Maybe this was part of her grieving, but I don't know if I would have been, while it was still dark, up and at it, up and on my way to that garden on that morning. I don't even need a small crisis in my life, and I feel like it would be a good day for a pajama day. That's kind of I don't know, maybe I'm on my own. But Mary didn't let her grief, she didn't let her disappointment or her pain stop her from getting up and moving forward. She went looking for Jesus. Sometimes when life is hard and things don't seem to be working out, it's so easy and so tempting to feel like giving up, to stop doing what we know God's told us to do, to withdraw, to isolate ourselves, because we don't really love that feeling of people seeing us in a vulnerable place. We don't love the fact that we're struggling and we're not looking like we've got it all right. I've had such a tender heart preparing for this conference because I feel like there may be many women here and you've arrived in this place and you can identify with Mary. Perhaps you've been through a season of loss. Perhaps you're right now in a difficult time and life has thrown you a curveball, like our poor sound guy. at the back. I'm about to say my next sentence, but it also fits in. You might be feeling incredibly vulnerable right now. And you're not sure what to do or where to go. Okay, we're going to have to bring it back. But we can do that because we're women. We can laugh and then we can cry and then we can manage it, hey? Back on track. I really felt like there might be some women here this evening and just getting up, getting dressed, and coming to Flourish was you showing up and you taking a big step. And I feel like God is going to meet you here in this garden and that God has got a very special plan and purpose for you being here. I recently heard a quote from a book that I love. It's The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. Anyone know that book? And the boy says, I can't see a way through. And the horse replies, can you see your next step? The boy is standing in the woods and he can't see his way through. And the boy says, yes, he can see his next step. And then the horse says, just take that. Just coming to Flourish might have felt like a big step for you. Well done for showing up. I trust that over the next 24 hours, God is going to show you the next step. And as we take that next step, as we show up, as we do the next right thing, the next thing that God's telling us to do, He will meet us there in that place. I'm inspired by Mary because even in her pain, even in her grief, she kept showing up. And there are so many women in this community that inspire me in the same way. The last 2 weeks, I've watched an elderly woman. I tried to find out her age, but I'm not exactly sure, and I don't want to insult her, but I would guess, I'm not going to guess, she's elderly. But the last 2 weeks, I've watched every day her husband brings her to the church. There have been work parties going on where they've been making all these flowers, and she's on a walker, and she hobbles in, and her husband helps her, and he gets her up the steps, and he gets her through the building. We've been working up on the top floor. She's managed 2 flights of steps to get there, and I don't think it's easy. Yesterday, she fell over. She hurt her shoulder. Someone had to help her up. I have been so inspired by that woman. Her name's Connie. She's not here this evening because she actually had to go to hospital to be checked out because of that fall that she had yesterday. But the voice note that she sent said, if I'm not there Saturday night, I will definitely be there on Friday night. I'll definitely be there on Saturday. I'm not missing this. She's inspirational. And there are so many women when we look around us, and I think that's the beauty of being together as women, is that we inspire each other to just keep showing up, to take the next step, whatever it is God puts on your heart to do. Let's encourage one another over the next 24 hours. There have been many times that I've felt like giving up, that I wonder if I've got what it takes, that I just feel like sometimes just saying, you know what, enough. I don't actually feel like being brave in this space. And one of the quotes, and I wasn't going to read it because it's a real boy quote. It's like really, but it's gutsy and it's real. So if you'll allow me, it's got nothing to do with the garden. But this quote, I remind myself of it often, and I really think it's true. It's a Theodore Roosevelt quote, and it says, it's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms and great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. This is about showing up. If I was going to put it in garden terms, it would be something like this. It's not the critic that counts, nor the woman who points out how another woman stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the woman who's still in the garden, whose face is marred by dirt and sweat, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to sow the seeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends herself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if she fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that her place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Thank you. Let's be like Mary. Let's be inspired to show up, to take the next step. It might be hard, it might be difficult, it might take everything within us to just step out and do what God's telling us to do, to show up, to be vulnerable, to say, I'm not coping, to reach out to someone and say, please, I need a friend. It might not be easy, but Mary has inspired me that when we do those things, Jesus is there. And that brings me to my second point. Jesus was right there. He was in the garden, even though he didn't seem to be. Mary thought Jesus was the gardener. She didn't realize that the one she was looking for, the reason that she had got up in the dark and gone out to that garden early in the morning, he was right there. And she didn't realize because she expected him to be a certain way. She turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Jesus asks Mary, "Who is it you are looking for?" And I believe this evening, God wants to ask every single one of us, who is it you are looking for? Who is it you are looking for? Sometimes when we look at our lives, it's hard to see where Jesus might be. And it might be tricky to know what he's actually doing because things are not the way we think they should be, or things are not turning out the way that we thought they should, or people don't behave the way that we expect them to or think that they should. Sometimes it can feel like God has let us down because he isn't where we expect him to be, and he isn't doing what we expected him to do. He isn't doing what we maybe hoped he would do, and the situation is looking grave. I believe that in every circumstance we find ourselves in, no matter how dark or how hard it might be, if we look closely and if we ask God to open our eyes and show us where he is and what he's busy doing, I believe that in every situation we will be able to see that God is always at work. God is always doing something in our lives. Sometimes he's working in us. Sometimes that's where he starts. Before he changes the situation, he starts in our hearts. Soon after I got married, I mentioned that I come from a family. My mom is a botanist. I've seen flowers. My grandmother gardens. I should be able to garden. I was given a packet of seeds, and I decided to plant my packet of seeds. And after a few weeks of diligently watering, it was just outside the front door of our house, I diligently watered every day my packet of seeds. I saw some sprouting green leaves. I was so excited. I was a gardener just like my mum. I was making things happen. I was a good wife, new wife, but I knew how to garden. Until my mum came to visit. And I said, "Check out, my seeds are growing. Look at my beautiful plants. They're growing. When are they going to get flowers?" And my mom took one look at my beautiful plants and she said, "Jax, I'm sorry, but those are weeds." I'm not sure what happened to the seeds, but I was diligently watering those weeds for weeks, waiting for the flowers. The other day I realized, while I was Googling, as we all do, that there are some really beautiful weeds. They're amazing. And do you know what else I realized is that there are some serious benefits to weeds. I didn't know there were any benefits. I didn't realize that for years people used weeds for medicine, vitamins. You don't even, well, maybe my husband will say sometimes I use some of the vitamins and green juices and those things that I give him. He might think those are weeds too. But how's this for a beautiful weed? Creeping Charlie. That's beautiful, hey? And then what about this one? Queen Anne's lace. Did you know Queen Anne's lace is a weed? I've seen that used in a bouquet before for a wedding. And I'm not sure that Queen Anne would be so happy to know that her flower is called a weed, but that's beautiful, hey? And then here's one more, a Virginia Meadow Beauty. A weed. It got me wondering, when you and I look at our lives, what weeds are we praying and asking God, please remove this weed? Please change this situation. What are we praying desperately and saying, God, I can't take it any longer. Make something beautiful out of this situation because it's a weed and we don't like it. Maybe the change needs to start in our hearts. Maybe we need to ask God, come and deal with the weeds in my heart. But what amazes me is sometimes the things that we think are weeds that we need to get rid of in our lives, God sees as beautiful. And God brings such beauty out of the darkest and hardest times in our lives. I think we need to change the question. And instead of saying, God, please show me, God, where are you? We should say, God, please show me where you are. Jesus, please show me what you're doing. Help me to have eyes to see where you are in the garden of my life. And thirdly, the third thing I'd like to draw out of the story about Mary is that being with Jesus in the garden changes everything. Being with Jesus in the garden changes everything. Mary was looking at an empty tomb. She couldn't see Jesus. She thought everything was going wrong. She suddenly sees Jesus. She realizes that that gardener is not actually a gardener, he's Jesus. And everything for her changes. Her whole perspective on her world changes because Jesus is not actually dead. He's very much alive. His plan that he spoke about before he died is very much still in action. He's still at work and he's still alive. And when Mary realizes this, her whole world changes. And then Jesus says to her in John chapter 20, verse 17 to 18, do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I'm ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, I have seen the Lord. When we see Jesus, when we spend time with Jesus, when we realize and we have fresh perspective of what God is doing in our current situation and in our lives, we also get a glimpse that the purpose of what God's doing in us is far bigger and far greater than just us. We realize that actually Jesus is not just working in us, but we get to share Jesus with those we come into contact with. We take what God is doing in our hearts to every single person that we interact with and meet along the way. And I really believe that over this time, God wants to breathe life into the God purpose that he has created each and every single one of us for. Mary, I'm sure, would have loved to stay in that garden, to just be with Jesus. She had come with her spices to anoint him, and yet Jesus says, don't stay here, go and tell them. Go and tell my disciples. And I believe what Jesus wants to do in our hearts over the next 24 hours, he wants to place a deposit in our hearts that is going to impact and influence many people around us as we go out from this place. Tennille mentioned that we gave you a dandelion, and I saw some of you laughing because you hadn't really thought that was a gift. And you may have sat on that darling dandelion. And I don't know if you also realized the yellow ones are also dandelions. I didn't know that. I only figured, as I say, you now know I'm not that great with gardening. But the yellow ones are also dandelions. Apparently, those are the fresh ones. And then when they go like that, and they get all those little propeller things, that's when they're like really ready to fly. That's also a dandelion. So whatever you got, would you mind? Oh, yes, Sid, thanks. I can't see a dandelion without thinking of that guy. Does anyone remember that? The last dandelion. And he picks it up and he munches it, and the two rhinos next to him want to eat him. And the dandelion. A dandelion looks quite pathetic, and yet it has brought so many people so much joy. A dandelion is the most famous weed in the world. There's a new fact for you if you didn't know that. But when I look at a dandelion, I think it's actually rather ridiculous and sometimes, and pretty average. And sometimes when I look at my life, or I look at my capacity, I think, not sure that I've got what it takes. I mean, how effective is this little dandelion going to be? And yet a dandelion has been known. Those little propeller things, can you pop that picture up, guys, if you don't mind, if you've still got it? Those little propeller thingies have been known to go 2 kilometers or 10 kilometers, or apparently, and one of my sons said, "How do you know this, Mom?" I don't know, but Google told me that those little propellers have been known to go up to 100 kilometers. That is impact and influence. You can try and get rid of dandelions. I don't think it's possible. I mean, we've picked 2,000 of them in Hillcrest this week, so we've done our bit. But I can tell you that every time you come to church, if you come to this church, and I know some of you are from other churches, and that's wonderful, you go take those dandelion propellers back to your church, because if you sat on them, they're on your bum. And they're going with you, and they will find somewhere to grow. How amazing is that? So don't underestimate the dandelion. And let's not underestimate what God can do in our lives and in our hearts when we interact with Him, when we say, "Jesus, I'm showing up. Here I am. I'm taking the next step. This is me. I'm willing to be vulnerable. This is where I'm at. We've shown up." And then we're saying, "God, show me in my life, in my situation." God knows each and every one of us. He knows what we're going through. He knows the difficulties we're facing. He knows the impossibilities that we're not sure how they're going to work out. When He looks at our lives, we say, "God, show me. Show me where you are, Jesus. Help me not to mistake you for the gardener. I want to see you, Jesus, in my situation, in my circumstance." And then on top of that, God, blow your God purpose into my life, that those little dandelion propellers can impact and influence the people that I come into contact with, the family that I've left back home over these next 24 hours. Let's go back different because of God touching our hearts and changing us. So thank you for joining me and joining us in the garden. May God be the gardener of our hearts.